Welcome to iLRN's featured Fireside Chat with Representative Suzan DelBene of Washington, 1st District, co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Virtual, Augmented, and Mixed Reality Technologies. Congresswoman Suzan DelBene represents Washington's 1st Congressional District, which spans northeast King County to the Canadian border and includes parts of King, Snohomish, Skagit, and Whatcom counties. First sworn into the House of Representatives in November of 2012, Suzan brings a unique voice to the nation's capital with more than 2 decades of experience as a successful technology entrepreneur and business leader. Representative DelBene is co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Virtual, Augmented, and Mixed Reality Technologies, sometimes known as the Reality Caucus. Suzan takes on a wide range of challenges, both in Congress and in the 1st District, and is a leader on issues of technology, healthcare, trade, taxes, environmental conservation, and agriculture. Representative DelBene currently serves as the vice chair on the House Ways and Means Committee, which is at the forefront of debate on a fairer tax code, healthcare reform, trade deals, and lasting retirement security. She serves on the Select Revenue Measures and Trade subcommittees. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Immersive Learning Research Network, Congresswoman DelBene.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. We've got some great questions. I think they're great questions. You were so instrumental in starting this Reality Caucus back in 2017. Can you tell us about some of the issues that you've encountered in trying to educate your fellow lawmakers and their staff on this emerging technology?
Well, it's a great question, and as someone, I spent most of my career in technology, so it was quite a culture shock when I came to Congress and saw how behind we were in using technology, and really just the limits that we had on technology literacy when it came to policy as well. So you've all seen cases where technology expert or executive will testify before Congress, and you can tell that members of Congress struggle with kind of looking at understanding concepts that are very technical in nature, and understanding what companies do and the impact that technology can have on the world. So it's a huge issue, especially now, as in proposing solutions to address issues of technology. If I have colleagues that don't understand the issues or are scared actually to get engaged on an issue because they don't feel like they have the foundation to really engage. So I do think that providing ways that we can engage members of Congress, inform the non-technology, and how technology has an impact on every aspect of our lives is so important. And the other thing I think that has been critical is to remind folks that technology isn't a silo. We talk about it as if it's kind of its own isolated world, but it's part of everything we do. It's foundational. It is part of our infrastructure, healthcare, our economy, the way we live and interact. And here we are with one example right now. So I think no matter what area someone might be focused on from a policy standpoint, issues like data privacy or the issues we'll discuss today more broadly on XR are foundational. So the more that we can make sure that members of Congress and legislators in all parts of government are informed and sophisticated in their understanding of technology is incredibly helpful. And that's why I helped found the Reality Caucus, because this is a place that we bring folks together. I also helped start up the Internet of Things Caucus, other ways for members to become educated, and their staff, because staff are a key part, to become educated on these issues and help build that basis for us to be able to move forward on strong policy.
Wow, that's really, I mean, this audience, the Immersive Learning Research Network, the designers, the scientists, the technologists, and the educators that are using these technologies, really, wow, are right there with your perspective in terms of the need to educate not only our the policymakers and politicians, but the general public as well about the profound innovations as well as some of the security and privacy issues that these new technologies um, bring up. So wow, thank you for your work already. That's fantastic. Um, what are some of the questions and issues that have arisen around XR technologies, since that 2017, which now sounds so long ago, that have really surprised you? You know,
Well, I think, first of all, I think folks didn't have a personal experience with XR, so they were trying to understand what it really meant. People think of virtual augmented reality. I think the first thing they think of is a video game, and many times think it's been more isolated to that world, to entertainment or the gaming world. So I think, first of all, we know the broad potential already, where XR has played such a key role. And so education on that it is not just a gaming technology, but the broad use cases and impact that it can have, from helping study the molecular mechanics of COVID-19, or doctors looking at the lungs of COVID-19 patients. The military clearly has had taken advantage of virtual reality, everything from flight simulators and medic training. And so I think that's one of the biggest areas where people are, the more we can even do basic demonstrations so people can have that personal experience and understand and see some of these other scenarios and cases is really important. And so when we've talked about bringing people together, some of it is just letting people try out technologies, and then they themselves can envision the broad impact that they can have. But I think that's probably the biggest issue, is what is the breadth of scenarios this applies in? How hard is it to use? You have to be a technologist to really engage, or is this something that will be more broadly available? And that's where folks being able to engage and use technologies, even in demonstration scenarios, really is impactful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Giving people the first hand experience of actually seeing these new technologies, it seems like such an important thing. And then also because the pace of change with the new technologies coming out at such a rate seems to be kind of an ongoing opportunity to do for folks in Congress. That's interesting.
Well, actually, that's a great point, because policy doesn't happen quickly.
Right.
And so we put it in place, and then it stays for 10 years or more before we change it. And that's actually an interesting challenge that we have ahead of us, is not only catching up with technology, but staying ahead and realizing that policy, we have to be more flexible and nimble with respect to policy, so we can keep up with technology and consumer rights and a variety of issues, because many times policy didn't anticipate new innovations that we see. So that's a challenge I think that we have on the side of government, is how we learn to be more nimble with respect to technology and policy.
Right. Yeah. That's yeah, actually, the research community sort of has an analogous kind of issue that, to go out and pose a question, gather the data, analyze the data, write it up, submit it to a journal, get it edited, and then finally, put into line and then finally published. That's like a year and a half minimum, um, at the fastest pace you could possibly go before that gets published. So the publications of what works in this field is it's really difficult to get it any faster than a year and a half. So we've brought up this idea of having a lighthouse of perpetually scanning the horizon and identifying these technologies, and then together as a community identifying those emerging technologies and capturing them as quickly as possible for their potential, and sharing those in the community. So iLRN is trying to live between this emerging technology scan and the publication of this research. So yeah, might be interesting to kind of have an analogous effort in Congress.
Well, there was an interesting point that actually someone from the Copyright Office had talked about technology or policy in the 70s, and that people had spent so much time trying to put together the policy that by the time it passed Congress, it was already out of date. So you start working on ideas, but then when you kind of get them all done, if that takes a few years, you've already moved on to something new, and so that does create this long kind of process of what people call the sausage making.
Right.
By the time you get done, you could be behind.
That's right. And some of these technologies really have profound implications for communications and security and privacy, as well as what we can do together as communities, as citizens. So boy, there's just a lot of really meaningful conversations, I think, that need to go on here. This is great. So the members of this research network, we're really the experts that are creating and teaching with these powerful emerging technologies, and we see the potential for unlocking these human possibilities, and also, quite frankly, the many dangers that these same tools represent. How can the immersive learning community better inform our policymakers about XR technologies?
Well, first I'd say meet with them. Meet with legislators. Make sure that you take the time to show them the work you're doing, bring up issues that you see that need to be addressed. Because I think that's number one, is getting out and making sure that issues are on the really just basically on the radar of legislators. Also showcasing technology, as I talked before, allowing people to kind of get that chance to have a firsthand idea. I love when folks come to Capitol Hill and do demo sessions, and seeing members of Congress engaged and really, in many cases, fascinated by different new technologies they hadn't seen, kind of how they work, and again, connecting that to some of the issues that we need to address from a policy standpoint. Because you talked about, we unlock possibility, but we also have to make sure we have strong consumer protections, so we protect consumer rights and human rights and civil liberties, and all of these are issues that are core issues that surround technology, but also not all of our policies in place anticipate the way technology works. And so I'd say engage, work with not only members of Congress, staff play such a key role in developing policy. And so engagement with staff is just as important on these issues, and helping them understand and work through issues, and vice versa. For those of you who haven't been involved as much on the policy side, understanding a little bit from the legislators and others some of the challenges in policy, because sometimes even figuring out what the right policy is can be very complicated, making sure you don't create another problem by writing, for example, a regulation to address one issue might create another issue somewhere else, and walking through those scenarios with folks also is helpful.
That's really cogent. Yes, that's excellent. iLRN, I can tell you as a collective is, focused on this sort of XR for good, or using the technologies that we might be able to use to help solve some of the world's bigger problems, and hunger and equality, inclusivity, perspective taking, etc. But we certainly need to really get in there and collaborate with all these different kinds of stakeholders so that we can make sure that that happens. And I think policymakers is such a key audience, or a key stakeholder that iLRN and our our membership needs to work with. So that's thank you so much. So do you have any thoughts on how XR technologies might help to modernize the government itself and maybe enable its members to achieve the government's purpose?
It's a great question. And actually, last Congress, I served on a select committee that was set up to study the modernization of Congress. And most people smile when we talk about the modernization of Congress because they figure there's lots of opportunity to modernize Congress. And that is true. The goal of the committee is to really make Congress more effective, efficient, and transparent. And frankly, the pandemic has really helped move Congress forward in use of technology. We weren't even using basic video conferencing in Congress prior to the pandemic. And I think it's been important for folks to understand the opportunities we have with technology to engage with constituents, to deal with the challenges that we have of folks living all over the country and coming together. And so that is been one issue where we probably made progress in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise, even though it's been such a terribly difficult time. I do think that it's not just Congress when we look at things like XR technologies, it's also looking at what federal agencies can do. We can definitely increase efficiency and creativity, things like city planning, development of transportation projects, being able to walk through them and see, get an idea of what something might look like, get a better sense of what the user experience would be. We talk about user experience so much in technology, but kind of the user experience of a space or in the physical world, all of those are things where I think XR can play a huge role. And then there's other ways that we can help use it to educate policymakers, to kind of help folks see and understand scenarios and stories in a different way. So I believe the potential benefits of these technologies are important and can definitely have an important impact, not only in government, but in so many other parts of our world. I've been a lead on a legislation called the VR Techs in Government Act. That's an acronym, which would create a federal advisory committee on the usability of reality technologies within the federal government, just to actually in more detail answer that question that you're asking.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinated to find out more about what those possibilities and potential developments are. That's just great. Wish we had more time. So I think this might also be a good opportunity to discuss your proposed Information Transparency and Personal Data Control Act legislation and the many intersections between these emerging XR technologies and, with their use, the new threats to privacy and data security. Do you want to maybe tell us a little more about that information transparency? And
if we think about the fundamental issues we have to address that really cross so many different segments of technology, I'd say one key point is privacy. And you also talked about data protection, consumer data privacy. We don't have a federal law on consumer data privacy. We have a couple states that started, California and Virginia, that have passed laws. But I think it's not a great scenario to imagine that we would, and those two laws are different. So imagine that we have a patchwork of 50 different state laws on consumer data privacy. And so no one knows what their rights are, because it might vary where they are. If you're a small business or a small startup, how do you know how to actually make sure that you're living up to that law when it's different everywhere? And you can imagine a small business, that would be almost impossible for folks to keep up with. You know, if someone travels to a different state and all of a sudden you have to put a dialogue box up saying something different is required in this area. So I do think it's really critically important that we have a federal standard. And as XR technologies continue to develop, we have to make sure people understand their rights, how their personal information could be used. And again, this is technology where, like other technologies, personal information, whether it's, you know, information about someone's health, but also biometrics, things like that, are all critically important personal information. And we know that millions of points of data can be recorded. An XR gaming session could record millions of points of data in just 20 minutes. Know the configuration of your room, your patterns of movement. And so what happens with that data? There's not really a clear information or clear limits on what companies can do with sensitive information. So my legislation would create a federal standard. It would require that companies have folks get consent when they are asking to use people's most sensitive personal information, so that it'd be opt-in in that way. We worked with stakeholders, industries, and consumer groups so that we would have something that would work for small businesses, for startups, for the community. And that's why it's so important that we have a federal standard. Make sure people can understand privacy policy, that they're written in clear, plain language. Most people don't know what they're signing up for, and sometimes just accept without understanding. And so, and we know that we don't have a seat at the international table in the absence of having a domestic policy. So things like GDPR in Europe really are broad and becoming more global standards. And so if we want to have a seat at the international table, and we should, because we are such strong innovators, that we need to make sure we figure out what our domestic policy is. So, so this is an important issue, again, an issue that requires folks to be educated on issues of privacy, et cetera, and have a sense of urgency. I have a sense of urgency about this one, but it's foundational, because if we don't address kind of that, then how do we look beyond that? How do we look beyond that at what rules of the road need to be in place for technology? To me, privacy is an important place to start. So that's what my legislation is. It make the Federal Trade Commission the enforcement authority on this. We've been working hard to educate lawmakers on that, so that we can do a better job of catching up and getting ahead in terms of making sure we have strong consumer protections when we talk about technology, and especially when we talk about personal data.
Absolutely. Wow, that's fantastic. This is such incredibly important work. Thank you so much for championing this, and it sounds like you really understand the issues in such an intricate, intimate sort of way. So that's fantastic. It just strikes me, one last thought that I had was that people, they vote with their emotions, and also sort of what they know. And with the sort of earlier we discussed sort of the need for people to understand kind of these new technologies and what they are, like you said earlier, like they tend to think of these things as games. They're gaming technologies, and yet here we're on the cusp of being able to use this XR technologies to do so many things, and they're set up to change the world, commerce and communication and education and business, in such transformative, fundamental ways. So maybe getting people to accept the need for the federal government to take on a privacy security role. Do we need to educate the public about the potentialities before they'll then accept that role? Or it seems so chicken egg. Um, do
Well,
you see what I'm?
actually, I guess the way I'd say it is, my title is representative, and I think representatives are looking at the issues they see that are impacting their constituents and prioritizing what they need to work on, what needs to get through. And so if privacy is an important issue, if the public is pushing, it will definitely have a big impact on our ability to move legislation more broadly. And originally I don't think people thought about some of these issues very much, but now that people are using technology more, and I think, as you brought up earlier, have seen the incredible potential and positives, but I've also seen the negatives, especially if we don't have good rules of the road in place. Most people have seen their data used in ways that they never expected it to be used. So it is a public issue, and as the public speaks out about this, I think that puts more pressure on Congress to move on legislation, like the legislation I was talking about earlier, but more broadly to address all types of issues that come up.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's good advice. I see it. There's a question in the chat from Karen Alexander, one of the co-leaders of the XR Women initiative that the Immersive Learning Research Network is proud to sponsor, and she asks, how can we support Representative DelBene in getting this legislation passed?
Well, one, talk to folks about these issues, the importance of privacy, the importance that we have a federal standard, because there's been some debate about whether there should be state-by-state legislation or federal standard. You obviously have heard my point of view on this one. The bill, which is, every bill has a number, the bill is HR 1816. We need more members to make this a priority so we can get it moved. So it's about talking to folks across the country, talking to other members of Congress, and to your point, talking to the public about it. But there's more information on the bill also online. So I think Karen just wrote it down there, but HR 1816.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much once again, Representative DelBene, for taking time to come to the iLRN virtual campus and chat with me about your work. And this has just been fantastic. Is there any other closing comments or something you'd like to say?
No,
to our
thanks.
audience?
This has been fascinating for me too, to my first time doing an event this way. So I appreciate the opportunity that I get to have this experience, but also thanks for engaging on these issues. There's so much work you can do and so much great potential. So it's very important that we are all engaged and involved and working hard so we get the promise and incredible rewards from these technologies, and also make sure that we are doing a great job of protecting consumers and protecting people from those downsides. So in partnership, I think we can make great progress, and I really appreciate having the time to speak with all of you.
Excellent. Well, we are really looking forward to being in touch and seeing what we can do collectively as a network to support what you're doing. So again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Wonderful. Okay, and I'm going to do a little closing here on the video. The main event has finished. We may stick around for maybe some networking or some photographs, but the live stream will now close. Thanks again to our videographers, Tony Cube Studios, and our YouTube audience. And go ahead and end.